Hello and welcome to Cognitive Drift. That's a pretty extreme quote, but it captures a tension that's been around for centuries. Is religion something humanity can eventually outgrow, or is it so deeply rooted in our psychology and culture that it will always return in one form or another? Today we're going to take a hard look at that question. Will religion ever die out? Not just in the sense of fewer people going to church or mosque, but whether the entire concept of religion, belief in gods, holy texts, rituals tied to supernatural claims, could ever vanish completely from human society. Let's start by looking at what's happening right now. Globally, religion is shrinking in some places and exploding in others. Western Europe, once the beating heart of Christianity, is now largely secular. In the UK, less than half the population identifies as Christian, and a growing number claim no religion at all. In countries like Sweden or the Czech Republic, faith barely has a pulse. But zoom out and the picture changes. Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, is seeing massive growth in Christianity and Islam. Even in countries where church attendance is low, belief in something spiritual, some kind of higher power, still lingers. So the trend is uneven, and that raises the real question. Is this just a temporary dip or the beginning of the end? Here's what we need to understand first. Religion isn't just a set of ideas. It's a system that taps into some very old human instincts. Our brains evolved to look for patterns, to find meaning, to tell stories about why things happen. When we didn't have science to explain lightning, disease, or death, gods were the answer. These beliefs helped people cope with uncertainty, and they were passed down because they gave communities an edge in survival. So even if science can now explain almost everything that was once a mystery, those psychological tendencies haven't gone away. The urge for certainty, the craving for purpose, they're hardwired, and religion offers them in a simple, emotionally satisfying way. That's why religion isn't disappearing as fast as you might expect. People don't just want facts. They want belonging. They want identity. And religion is like a cultural Swiss Army knife. It offers meaning, morality, community, rituals, even music and art, all in one package. But here's the catch. Every generation that grows up without strong religious pressure is less likely to see religion as necessary. Right now, in many developed countries, younger generations are the least religious in history. In the US, for example, the number of people who identify as nones, meaning no religious affiliation, has skyrocketed in just a few decades. That's not a small trend. That's a cultural earthquake. If this keeps going, you might think, eventually, religion just fades away. But will it? Or will something else take its place? Because here's a twist. When you take religion out, humans often fill that gap with something similar. Look at political cults, conspiracy theories, even extreme fandoms. They borrow the same structures. Sacred texts become manifestos, leaders become prophets, believers divide the world into good and evil, insiders and outsiders. The labels change, but the psychology looks familiar. That suggests something important. The problem isn't just religion, it's the way human minds work. So, does that mean religion in its traditional sense will survive? Or are we heading toward a future where religion doesn't die but mutates into something else? Let's dig deeper into why some people predict its extinction. The biggest argument is modernization. As societies become wealthier, better educated, and more stable, religiosity tends to decline. Sociologists call this the secularization thesis, and historically it holds up pretty well. When people feel secure, when they're not worried about famine, war, or disease, they rely less on divine protection. That's why countries with strong social safety nets tend to be less religious. But here's the kicker. The world isn't evenly developed. Many regions still face economic hardship, instability, and conflict. And in those conditions, religion thrives. Because when life feels chaotic, faith offers comfort and control. It promises justice in a world that often feels unjust. So even if Europe and parts of North America keep secularizing, huge populations elsewhere may not follow the same path anytime soon. By 2050, Africa is expected to have the largest Christian population in the world. Islam is also projected to grow faster than any other major religion, largely because of higher birth rates in Muslim-majority countries. This means that, in terms of raw numbers, religion is not dying globally. It's just shifting its center of gravity. But let's think long-term, really long-term. 100 years from now or 1,000, will humanity still gather in churches, mosques, and temples? Or will those buildings become museums like ancient ruins? The answer depends on two forces pulling in opposite directions. Science and technology are making the old stories harder to believe. Every time a mystery gets solved, the God of the gaps shrinks a little more. People don't need Zeus for thunder or Apollo for the sun anymore. We understand evolution, the Big Bang, and quantum physics, concepts far more awe-inspiring than ancient myths. On the other hand, technology also creates new anxieties: climate change, AI, pandemics, big existential fears, and fear has always been a friend to faith. When people feel powerless, they reach for certainty. So if the future feels less secure, not more, religion might hold on longer than we think. Or it might evolve into something unrecognizable, like techno-spirituality, belief in a conscious universe, or in AI gods. Sound far-fetched? People already talk about the singularity with almost religious devotion. Now, let's talk about something most people overlook. Religion isn't just about belief, it's about identity politics. In many places, saying, "I'm Christian," or "I'm woo," isn't just about God. It's about belonging to a tribe, protecting your culture. That's why religion often spikes when people feel their identity is under threat. So as long as humans keep drawing lines between us and them, religion or something like it will probably survive. But does that mean the old gods last forever? Not necessarily. Belief systems can collapse fast once the social conditions propping them up change. Look at ancient Egypt. For thousands of years, people worshipped Ra and Osiris, then gone. Today, nobody believes in Zeus or Odin as literal gods. Christianity and Islam might feel untouchable now, but so did those religions once. If that pattern holds, the question isn't will religion die, but when and what comes after. And here's the irony. Even if traditional religion fades, we might never be a purely rational species. We might keep inventing new myths, new rituals, new sacred narratives, because the need for meaning is part of being human. So maybe the real future isn't a world without religion, but a world where religion looks nothing like it does today. The question then becomes, how do we prepare for that future? Do we double down on critical thinking, education, and open societies so that whatever replaces religion is at least grounded in reason and compassion? Or do we let history repeat itself, swapping one set of dogmas for another? That choice is still ours. When we ask if religion will die out, we're really asking if human nature can change. Because religion, at its core, isn't just about gods or scriptures. It's about how the human brain copes with reality. Think about what religion offers. A story about where we came from, why we're here, what happens when we die. Those are not small questions. They cut to the heart of existence. And when science answers them, it often does so without the emotional comfort people crave. Telling someone that the universe began 13.8 billion years ago with a quantum fluctuation is fascinating. But it doesn't tell you why your child died, or whether you'll see them again. Religion gives answers that feel personal. It says, "Don't worry, there's a plan." That promise is hard to compete with, so even if traditional religions collapse, that hunger for meaning doesn't go away, and this is where a lot of secular thinkers make a mistake. They assume that if you remove religion, people will just become rational truth seekers. History suggests otherwise. When old belief systems break down, new ones often rise quickly. Look at 20th century politics. When religion lost influence in parts of Europe, what filled the gap? Totalitarian ideologies, communism, fascism. Movements that demanded loyalty, offered grand narratives, promised a utopian future. They didn't call themselves religions, but they behaved like them, complete with sacred texts, martyrs, and heretics. This tells us something crucial. If religion does fade, it won't leave an empty space. It will leave a vacuum, and nature hates a vacuum. That's why it's dangerous to assume the decline of religion automatically leads to a purely rational world. Humans are not built for pure logic. We're storytelling animals, and stories are powerful. So, if religion is tied so deeply to our psychology, does that mean it's eternal? Not quite, because while human nature is stubborn, it's not fixed. Culture can reshape instincts over time. Look at how morality has shifted. For most of human history, slavery was considered normal. Today, it's unthinkable in most societies. That didn't happen because our biology changed. It happened because ideas changed and culture rewired our sense of right and wrong. The same could happen with religion. If generations grow up in a world where science and reason provide not just facts but also meaning, the psychological pull of faith could weaken, slowly, over centuries, not overnight. Education plays a huge role here, not just memorizing facts, but teaching critical thinking, skepticism, and how to find purpose without supernatural answers. That's the long game, but it's not guaranteed, because education can be undone by fear. And fear is always lurking. Take pandemics. When COVID hit, did we see a wave of rational, science-based calm? For some, yes. For others, no. Conspiracies spread like wildfire. People turned to faith healers, prophets, and magical thinking. Even in highly educated societies, that's the fragility of progress. Fear can flip the switch back to superstition in an instant. So here's the paradox. The same conditions that make religion unnecessary, stability, prosperity, security, are hard to maintain forever. And when those conditions crack, religion often rushes back in. Does that mean religion is indestructible? Not necessarily, but it does mean its decline depends on more than just knowledge. It depends on building societies that feel safe, fair, and meaningful without divine guarantees. Now, let's zoom out even further. What about the far future? Centuries or millennia from now? Picture a world where humans have colonized other planets, where AI runs most of the infrastructure, where we can edit our genes, maybe even upload our minds into machines. In that world, will people still pray to ancient gods, or will they invent new ones? Science fiction often imagines hyper-advanced societies as completely secular, but history warns us. Progress doesn't erase our emotional needs. It just changes the shape of our beliefs. In fact, some thinkers argue that technology could make new religions stronger, not weaker. Take transhumanism, the idea that humans can transcend biology through technology. For some, it's a scientific goal. For others, it's almost spiritual. Immortality, salvation through tech, a paradise of infinite life. These are old, religious themes dressed in futuristic clothes. Or look at AI. If we create machines vastly smarter than us, some people will treat them as gods, maybe even worship them. Because the moment something feels omniscient, omnipotent, and beyond human understanding, the old religious instincts kick in. So in a strange way, the death of traditional religion could give birth to something even more godlike. Only this time, built by us. But let's not get lost in the future. Back to the present. If religion does decline, what are the main forces driving it? First, information access. A few centuries ago, if you wanted to know how the world works, you asked a priest. Today, you ask the internet. When knowledge is democratized, authority based on sacred texts starts to crumble. That's why the rise of the internet correlates with declining religiosity among younger generations. Second, pluralism. When people live in diverse societies, exposed to multiple religions, it's harder to believe yours is the absolute truth. That doesn't kill faith instantly, but it plants seeds of doubt. Third, moral progress. Many traditional doctrines clash with modern values on gender, sexuality, and human rights. Younger generations often see these teachings as out of step with reality, and once a religion's moral authority erodes, its influence collapses fast for people. But here's the counterpoint. Religion isn't just about belief, it's about community. And community is something a lot of secular societies are struggling to replace. Loneliness is rising in many developed countries. People have fewer close friends, less social trust. And when life feels disconnected, religion offers belonging, rituals, shared purpose. That's a powerful draw. This might explain why some people leave traditional religion only to join cults, extremist groups, or movements that feel like religions in disguise. They're chasing the same psychological benefits. So if we really want a world without religion, or at least without harmful forms of it, we have to offer something better. Not just facts, but frameworks for meaning. Not just criticism, but community. Otherwise, people will keep reaching for whatever fills that void. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. We might never reach a world where no one believes in gods. Because even if 90% of humanity moves on, there will always be outliers. The real question is whether religion remains a dominant force shaping laws, politics, and education, or whether it becomes a cultural relic like astrology in most countries, still around, but with little real power. And based on current trends, that future seems plausible. In many developed nations, religion has already lost its grip on government and law. That shift might continue, but globally, the story is slower and messier. So will religion ever die out? If by die out we mean vanish completely, probably not in the foreseeable future. But will it lose its central role in human life? That seems likely over time if we keep pushing for education, security, and critical thinking. And if we fail at that, then history tells us what happens. When fear returns, faith returns with it. Maybe not in the same form, but always in some form. So the question isn't just about religion, it's about us. About whether we can handle uncertainty without illusions, whether we can face mortality without stories of eternity, whether we can find purpose in a universe that owes us nothing. If we can, then maybe, just maybe, religion will become a chapter in human history instead of the whole book. But that choice is still in our hands. Why is it so hard for religion to fade? The answer lies deep in our psychology. Humans are wired for certainty. Our brains hate ambiguity. It feels like danger. For most of human history, not knowing meant death. Not knowing where predators were, not knowing what plants were safe. So the mind evolved to close gaps fast, even if the answer was wrong. Better a false sense of security than none at all. Religion thrives on this instinct. It gives absolute answers to questions that science often leaves open-ended. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? Science can tell you how life began, how consciousness evolved, and what happens biologically at death. But it doesn't tell you why you exist or whether your life matters. And here's the key. Humans don't just seek truth, they seek meaning. The two are not the same. Religion specializes in meaning, packaged in a way that feels comforting and eternal. That's hard to compete with when reality often feels cold and indifferent. This is why even some non-believers drift toward spiritual language. They talk about energy, the universe having a plan, everything happening for a reason. Because deep down, we want order, not chaos, patterns, not randomness. And when life feels fragile, those ideas feel like an anchor. So can a purely secular world satisfy that craving? Maybe, but it requires more than just tearing religion down. It means building systems of meaning that don't rely on illusions. And this brings us to morality. One of the oldest claims in defense of religion is that without it, society collapses into chaos. If there's no God, everything is permitted, as Dostoevsky supposedly wrote. It's a scary idea, but is it true? No. In fact, research suggests the opposite. Countries with high levels of atheism, like Denmark, Sweden, Japan, consistently rank among the safest, most peaceful, and most prosperous on Earth. Crime rates are low, corruption is low, quality of life is high. They didn't achieve this by threatening people with hell. They did it through education, social trust, and strong institutions. Morality, it turns out, doesn't need divine punishment. It needs empathy, cooperation, and a sense of shared humanity. These are traits that evolved long before organized religion. Wolves show loyalty to their pack, primates punish cheaters. Morality is older than scripture. It's written in our biology. So the idea that religion is the foundation of ethics is a myth. The real foundation is our ability to care about others, to feel fairness and reciprocity. Religion simply codified those instincts, sometimes for good, sometimes for control. If anything, history shows that tying morality to religion can be dangerous, because when right and wrong depend on divine command, they stop evolving. That's why many faith traditions resisted abolition, women's rights, and LGBT rights. They were locked into ancient codes. Secular ethics, by contrast, can adapt. It can say, we used to think this was okay, now we know better. That flexibility is how societies progress. But progress isn't automatic. If religion fades and nothing replaces its moral framework, there's a risk of fragmentation. That's why conversations about secular meaning matter so much, not just for individuals, but for entire civilizations. Because here's the reality. If humanity is going to outgrow religion, we need to do more than dismantle old myths. We need to create cultures that give people the same psychological benefits, belonging, purpose, comfort, without resorting to superstition. Communities where people feel connected, narratives that inspire action without demanding blind faith, rituals that celebrate life, not death. Some of this is already happening. Secular humanism, ethical societies, even non-religious rituals like weddings and funerals that celebrate life instead of preaching fear of hell. These are small steps, but they matter. So, will religion die out? Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not for centuries, but if we measure by influence on laws, politics, education, then yes, the trend suggests religion is slowly losing its grip. The bigger question is whether we're ready for the world that comes after. A world where meaning isn't handed down from the sky, but built from the ground up. Where morality isn't frozen in scripture, but grows with knowledge and empathy. Where humans learn to live without eternal guarantees and still find life worth living. That's not an easy shift. It means accepting that the universe doesn't owe us purpose and then creating our own anyway. It means looking into the abyss and not flinching. Nietzsche once wrote, "Man is a rope, tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss." The death of religion doesn't mean the death of meaning. It means walking that rope without illusions. And maybe, on the other side, finding a kind of freedom we've never known before. The question isn't whether religion will die. The question is whether we can grow beyond it without losing ourselves. And that is a question only time and us can answer.